Wait just a second.
And backstage.
Yeah, the name is because we wanted to talk only with person that do real bodybuilding. Okay. We are live also
Yeah.
on the Instagram. Okay. We are okay. So, hi everyone. This is something like a dream come true for me.
Also for me too.
I was reading Gabriele about 17 years ago on BodyWeb, the biggest social at the time forum of bodybuilding, and now I can call him my real friend in real life. I was watching some years ago Andrea in a podcast, and now my house is your home, and I wait for you in July.
I can't wait.
Simone, I always see you on the stage. Now you're my athlete and my big brother. So maybe the person that in last 2 years changed more my life. And Scott, I can't find the word today for me. So let's go. We start this talk. First question. Scott, you do a lot of things in your life in bodybuilding. When you think of yourself, you think like you're more a scientist, an athlete, a PhD, a coach, a teacher. Who was Scott and who is Scott nowadays?
Before I answer that, I want to say thank you for having me on here. And I like to say also, I feel a bit guilty because I'm speaking my native tongue and you are speaking English. And I know what this feels like. I've been doing podcasts in German for the last 3 years or so. And it can be difficult. It can be stressful. So I have empathy. I know where you're coming from. And I feel guilty. I feel like I should be trying to speak Italian, but I know scusi. And that's it. That's all I know from years ago when I was there. Right? So, yeah, thank you for having me on, guys. It's really an honor. Especially given you're making this language leap, which is another step in honoring me and showing respect that you trust in things I have to say. So I really appreciate that very much. I just use the word teacher. That's the word I try to hang. I mean, I've done all those things, right? I've coached. I've been a scientist. I've been a college professor. I've been an athlete. And coaching, the word coaching or coach didn't really exist in the bodybuilding industry when I started, right? I was a personal trainer in 1993 for the first time, right? And worked in gyms for years and years and years. And then the term coach came into being. But along my path of getting educated, getting a PhD, becoming a college professor, et cetera, it was the idea of teaching that was the most important. And that's not just, and maybe we'll get into this topic, that's not just telling people things that I believe in. That's not just disseminating information. That's also hopefully, and that's something that's being lost in today's society, I think more so because of the nature of social media and how people interact, getting people to start thinking for themselves as much as possible. So to question authority, to question me, to question you guys, to question themselves. Because ultimately, and I'm sort of stealing this idea from a philosopher named Alan Watts, who really made it apparent to me. He's a British philosopher who's since passed on. But you can see his stuff on YouTube. But watch out, there's AI-generated versions of him now. Okay. But the thing that he pointed out is that ultimately, regardless of what experts we listen to, we're making the decision. We have to make the decision. I have expert A, B, and C. I have my grandmother who tells me I should do this. I have the guy in the gym who tells me of all these potential sources of information. But ultimately, I'm the one making the decision to trust in one person or another. So recognize that. And you can also decide to reject an expert's opinion and do something on your own. And I'm all for that, right? So yes, to answer your question, I'm a teacher. And I think to answer your second question, I'm trying to be that, because I'm getting older now. I'm in my mid 50s. I haven't competed for a few years. The stage is now in my past. And in anticipation of some of the other questions that you sent me in the email, thank you for the nice itinerary. I appreciate that. The most important thing I think that is going, or one of the most important things that's being lost nowadays is, and this happens, this is just something that I think is very human, is as a generation gap comes into being and you have the old guys who talk about how good it was, how 90s bodybuilding was better, how, we did it and it was harder. And we always laugh, it's a saying in the US, when I went to school, it was uphill both ways and it always snowed or there was sleet. Like it was just so, it's a very funny saying. It's uphill both, that can't be. But we tend to exaggerate things. We tend to exaggerate these things. And I think it's important to have empathy with the younger generation and recognize that if all of us, we're all sort of an older generation, I would say, not throwing any stones here, but if we had grown up 20 years, 30 years later, meaning if I were in my 20s right now, I would be experiencing a very different world in terms of bodybuilding. I would be exposed to different things, and I might be behaving in ways that I'm now criticizing. So it's important. This is just a thing that I get as a teacher. And in the helping professions, I'm also an acupuncturist. You need to start where the person is. So if you have, for instance, a young bodybuilder who says, so-and-so says that, I'm wasting my time unless I use a gram of steroids a week, or I do this, that, and the other. If you just say, you're a fool, you're a dummy, what are you thinking? Go back to the drawing board, learn how to work. That doesn't meet that person where that person is. That person went into the bodybuilding realm and they hear this voice of someone who's got 500,000 followers. Everyone's liking it. It seems like it makes sense. That is the place where that person needs to be talked to. It's like, okay, let's take a look at this person who's giving you this advice. Let's examine it. And I'm going to start where you are in terms of the information that in terms of the perspective you have as a 21-year-old. And then maybe I will be able to show you my perspective a little more clearly. So that's the thing, I think, to get back to your question. I'm trying to be the older guy with perspective who also has empathy for the younger guys at the same time, so that whatever information I have that they might take on board is something that can reach them. If I don't have any empathy, why would you listen to someone who doesn't care about you when you have the sense they have no empathy for you? You wouldn't. So that's what I'm trying to do nowadays as a teacher.
Ok, Andrea, se riesci.
Can you hear me?
On a phone or tablet.
That's my internet being funny. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, we don't want to waste your time too much, but I will just try to give a very, very brief and undeserving explanation in Italian about what you said, okay, for the public. And then obviously when they will see again on YouTube, there will be the auto-generated translation, and that will give you a little bit more of dignity to your speech. Definitely more than what I will be able to do.
Okay.
Per il pubblico a casa, Scott ha detto fondamentalmente due cose fondamentali perlomeno. La prima è che al di là di tutto lui si considera un insegnante, il che è particolarmente vero anche se si pensa all'ultimo libro che ha scritto, che è Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. In pratica diventa il coach di te stesso, quindi è una forma di qualche maniera conferma di questa visione della cosa. E come insegnante il suo ruolo è quello di creare persone formate a pensare per se stesse, a mettere in discussione l'autorità, soprattutto la sua, a non essere mai appagate per quello che sanno, ma cercare sempre di più. E a questo poi ha fatto un riferimento interessante al fatto che la persona che è adesso è indissolubilmente legata al fatto che ha vissuto l'età che ha vissuto quando non c'erano i social media, quando la situazione del bodybuilding era diversa. Se lui fosse giovane oggi sarebbe una persona diversa, quindi c'è anche stato un riferimento a come i
Andrea,
social
io
media
questo,
influiscono.
scusa se ti interrompo,
Assolutamente.
io questo lo sottolineo perché Scott dai tanti anni, since a long time, l'ho vissuto così, nel senso che Scott insegna portandotici, lui ti accompagna davvero e quello che io continuo a dire e prendo da lui, il fatto di alimentare la capacità critica di pensare con la tua testa, lui ti dà le basi, ti dà la capacità di nozioni, l'esperienza, la visione, però non ti dà sentenze. Scott non dà sentenze, ci arrivi da solo. E questo lo posso confermare sempre, sempre, anche quando è stato immettersi nel fortitude training, lui non lo mette come diktat, come assolutismo, no, assolutamente no. Infatti è plasmabile, è adattabile, è customizzabile in maniera molto sartoriale.
Ho capito.
Questo diciamo
Vero.
che è proprio la sua filosofia, che è così che deve essere un insegnante. Un insegnante non deve dare delle regole e basta precise. Sappiamo che, specie in ambito scientifico, tecnico-scientifico, la fisiologia umana, la biologia segue determinate leggi, tra virgolette, no? Però è sempre la soggettività che fa la padrona. E Scott, quello che ho sempre vissuto, ripeto, in prima persona, è che lui su questo aspetto ci porta te a trarre delle conclusioni che poi non esistono, perché tutto può essere discutibile.
Quello che dici, just a second, Scott, do you think you had a rough idea of what we were saying just now? Anyway,
No, I don't.
I can assure you only good things. And Gabriele actually
That's what I would
confirmed confirmed everything you said by the way he known you, and most of all the fact that you never try to be too dogmatic in your reaching. And it was confirmed the fact that you always try to carry on a flow of thoughts about where to go after a question, rather than just give a blatantly plain full stop answer. Which, by the way, I remember very well. It was the same thing that we saw when we had the chance to see your seminar in Edinburgh. And if whoever has the chance to see your website after buying the Fortitude training book, as the way you respond to everybody on the on your website, and instead of just simply give a straight answer, you try often to make people understand on their own, because oftentimes they already know the answer. They just want some sort of guarantee that what they're doing, what they're saying is the right thing. So it was basically a confirmation all around about everything you just said. But for what is worth, Gabriele, they thought it was very important to, in some way, confirm twice, double check everything you just said.
Double check. Yes, I can confirm it.
There you go. So,
just to stay on young generation now, we are, maybe I'm the youngest here, but I'm 41, so not that young. Scott, it's maybe our fault to not be able to use social media in the right way, to be more connected with young generation and talk and give him our knowledge, our experience.
That's a huge question. Without sounding too conspiratorial, one of the things.
Oh, please be.
Yeah, okay, I'll go full conspiracy theory here.
Go for it.
So, as comparison, for instance, when the internet first kind of came into being at the big bang of the internet, and I'll try to keep this shorter so you guys don't have 10 minutes of translation to do. There was first news groups that were available, which were sort of primitive, and then discussion boards like V-Bulletin is the major forum or the major platform that's still available that came into being. And that discussion forum I have on my website. That's for people who bought the Fortitude training book. That's sort of a long form discussion form that people can actually, every post is seen. You can write long posts. They can be as long as you want, multiple links. And it makes it easier to have long form discussions, so to speak, online. And now jump forward into the future to Facebook. And now we have Instagram, and you see, for instance, various features like the threading that happens. So you see a post on, like sometimes I'll see a post on Facebook. I like to see the comments. You show comments, it shows you some comments. There's comments hidden under the comments. It happens on Reddit too, for instance. It definitely happens on Instagram. So what you have essentially in these situations, especially on a worldwide platform like that, is potentially thousands of people all in the same room answering the same question, commenting simultaneously on the same post. And no one can necessarily see or hear the other people's posts. So go back to the old forum, the old school discussion forums, you would have multiple pages. Each post would have its own place. And you would see there's 8 pages of posts. So you can say, okay, so said this, there's a record of all the interaction. Nowadays, we're all just talking to one another without hearing the other people. So to get to your question, Alberto, it's very, very different. The forum is, I think, intentionally, this is a conspiratorial, the forum is intentionally disallowing deeper levels of communication. And what that does, and I'll close with this, what that does, I think, over time, is it makes those individuals seeking answers, younger generations, less capable of actually doing deeper intellectual digging and deeper intellectual thought because they don't do it. They don't have, they read comments coming. You see the same comment repeated over and over again. You see all sorts of just emojis. There's so much nonsense that is the environment in which their brain develops intellectually. So that makes them even less receptive to the thoughts of the old school guys who are trying to provide a greater perspective on things. So I'll leave it at that.
Actually, before trying to give a translation, I want to add something, and then, of course, everybody else can do the same. What you're saying is so true, and also the way the new technology is structured, you always have less and less space, which is reducing, is narrowing the dictionary that people can use, the vocabulary, which make it the thought over time, not just the language, but the thought simpler.
Yeah,
people become unable to see the nuances.
Twitter or X is that's why I dislike it so much, because 256 characters, I think, is, or something like that. You
want to try to give biology explanation about a process in 250 words, in 250 characters. I mean,
right.
Good luck with that if you can. So
yes,
that obviously it's a great confirmation of everything you said. Unless I'm going to speak Italian just a little bit. Volete dirgli qualcosa oppure posso provare una traduzione?
Sintetizza il più possibile, Andrea.
Ok, so quello che Scott ha detto relativamente ai social media è una questione particolarmente importante, e cioè nel tempo si è passati sempre dall'essere social media che permettevano un certo grado di comunicazione a livello di internet, dove nonostante tutti i difetti, nonostante i litigi, nonostante i threads e i flame, c'era la possibilità di parlare, comunicare, esprimersi parecchio. Quando sono entrato in chat ho ringraziato Gabriele per quello che ha fatto, per esempio, su Bodyweb 20 anni fa, dove c'erano thread di 1000 pagine e si poteva sviscerare anatomia, biologia a dei livelli dove francamente uno non si aspetterebbe da un sito di bodybuilding, e invece era possibile. E nel tempo questo si è sempre ridotto fino a oggigiorno, dove abbiamo social media che permettono solo 200 caratteri, il che riduce la capacità di pensare, la capacità di guardare delle persone, dei giovani, che si trovano fisicamente incapaci di andare a cercare in profondità risposte e soluzioni ai loro problemi. E ha fatto l'esempio, per esempio, Scott, in cui su Thread c'è la possibilità di andare a guardare i commenti, ma i commenti sono sempre più stretti, sempre più ristretti, sempre più nascosti, tale per cui ci sono molte voci che parlano, ma sono predicatori nel deserto in pratica, nessuno riesce a connettersi con gli altri. E questo è quello che Scott ha visto essere il maggiore problema nella comunicazione sociale di oggi. E non è entrato da gran signore qual è in rant sul fatto che una volta si stava meglio, quando si stava peggio e così via. Quindi direi che quando avrete la possibilità di ascoltare la traduzione potrete sentire tutte quante le nuances, tutte quante le tonalità di grigio del suo discorso. Però per dare una base penso che ci siamo.
E Andrea, una cosa che avete detto è che la capacità di una persona di pensare è direttamente proporzionale al numero di parole.
Sì, ma quello l'ho detto io e non pensavo fosse interessante, quindi non l'ho detto.
Secondo me sì.
Okay.
No.
È molto. So let's go on social media. There's something that made me more than angry when young people talk about PAD, and nobody that do this post, this video, are bodybuilding coaches, athletes, but young guys, maybe something that do preparation for the beach. Where's the border between good information and make young guys do stupid things?
Scusate se interrompo, sarebbe il caso, penso, di fare la traduzione anche delle domande. Perché
Allora, ho chiesto velocissimamente, ho chiesto a Scott una cosa che a me fa molto arrabbiare a tutti noi, sul fatto che sui social giovani parlano di PED, cioè di molecole, di androgeni, eccetera, eccetera, ma non sono preparatori di bodybuilding, non preparano per le gare, ma magari per la spiaggia. E quindi dov'è il confine tra la corretta informazione e invogliare i giovani a fare cose stupide?
perfetto.
Let's go, Scott.
Oh, okay. I heard stupid out there at the end. I think I know what that might mean.
No, don't worry.
No, I know you didn't mean me. So one thing that's just because you said this makes you, I think you said more than angry. It's frustrating, right? And I think it's important for us to have perspective too. There's always going to be sort of a normal distribution. And this is what I run into with everything human to some degree. We're gonna have some people who just fall on the idiot side of things. We're gonna have some people that are highly reflective, overly cautious, maybe, who won't just dive in and go for it, and then everything in between. So I think what's important in looking at that situation is, again, like what I mentioned earlier, is to see, okay, who can I possibly shift in terms of their perspective and how can I get to them? So there'll be some people, you guys probably know the infamous Boston Lloyd, who now has passed on. And he will unfortunately be forgotten by many people in 5 years, not by us, but he had kind of a tragic story. He left behind a child. He left behind his wife. I met Boston and really nice person in real life. But there will be people that just have that sort of psychological, neurological wiring that are just going to go overboard and they're going to potentially do themselves harm, right, in the long run. And that's what it seems like probably happened with him. But there will be some people maybe who are closer to, they're in between, right? And those are the people that I think it makes sense to focus on, because those are the individuals who are maybe more clear-headed, who might be amenable to the advice that you might give to them and say, hey, take a look at one extreme. We've got someone like Boston Lloyd, who just was using everything under the sun. He went full bore, and it essentially cost him his life, it seems like. That's probably the most logical. That's Occam's razor, the most logical conclusion we can make. And consider the question: if you're going to go on a steroid cycle, let's say to look good for the beach, right? And that's what you have planned for now. Did you know, for instance, that there's some possibility that your own endocrine system won't recover, that you might end up hypogonadal? Here's a story that you feel free to pass this on. This happened years ago. I was in the UK at Body Power, and I gave a talk there called Bodybuilding Pharmacology 101. And
I know that.
yeah, and I've given that online.
I
think,
remember.
yeah. And it's just the basic things that I think people should have an understanding of before they dive in. And after that talk, two brothers came up to me, two young guys. One was, I think, maybe 18 or 19 at the time. The other one was 21. And one of them had decided to start using gear. And I think a coach might have helped him. I can't remember the story. And he was having major problems. And the other brother was still even thinking about it. The other guy was hypogonadal. He was having a hard time getting HRT because he was so young. The doctor didn't believe him. He was really in a bad place. But both of them came to me and they said, "Thank you so much, because this clarified so many things I didn't know, that had we known, we wouldn't even be thinking about doing this, because the risks aren't known." So you can help some of the people some of the time, but you can't help all of the people all the time. So I think putting your frustration aside, and imagine you're speaking to the person who's on the fence, as we say, right? Who hasn't made their decision, and talk to them and realize there's going to be some people who are going to go overboard. There's some people who aren't going to, they're smarter about things. They're not going to just go on a massive cycle of gear to look good for a beach party or what have you. But I think focusing with some specificity on the people that, and with messages you think will move people in the right direction, and just realize you can't help everyone. That's sort of my first thought with that question.
Just a second, Scott. Posso intervenire? Gli volevo chiedere una cosa a proposito di questo, Albert.
Certo.
Certo. Scott, before the translating, I had a question, since you are in the very privileged position to have access to the American market, so to speak, in terms of bodybuilding, but you are known everywhere, the UK, and due to your knowledge of German language, also the German as well. Do you see a difference in the way the PEDs market knowledge is evolving since you have started? Because I can imagine we tend to see everything on a kind of flat line, everything is the same, but there must be some difference in the way they are used and interpreted.
It's a 180-degree turn, and I think you can't turn more than 180 before coming around the other way, but it's a dramatic change. So when I first started off, like, this was you didn't talk to anyone about this. In fact, you didn't even talk to other bodybuilders necessarily, unless it was one or two of your close friends, right? Everyone was anonymous online to protect their identity, because if people are using gear, it's illegal. It's not in the UK, but in the US it is. Mm-hmm. So people were very secretive about it, and the amount of information was limited. But people, because of that, it wasn't yet a forbidden fruit, so to speak, but because of the respect that was given to the pharmaceuticals, to the drugs, people thought a lot more about using them. And now, gosh, there's so much to address. That's a huge question.
Okay, just forget it then. Don't worry.
No. It's a great question. We should cover it. I just don't want to provide so much for you to translate. Now
I'll do my best.
We've gotten to the place where there's something to say for being transparent about drug use. You've got some individuals who are fake natties, perhaps. People doubt that they're actually natural. And then people are coming out full bore, telling everything that they've done. And what doesn't necessarily get conveyed there, or what isn't realized, I think, is that people are going to filter the things that they want to hear, right? They're going to filter all the positive things. And we don't probably have enough people coming forth and saying, this is what happened to me that's really, really negative. I got my hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis was shut down. I couldn't get HRT because at that time doctors wouldn't do that very readily. They didn't have the clinics 10, 15 years ago. So it could be a very, very difficult thing. My relationship went to shit. I got highly depressed. And what unfortunately happens, and this is the last thing I'll say because I have so many thoughts, but there's a selection bias that happens online with all the information we get. So the people who look amazing post a lot on Instagram. The people who had great results post a lot on social media. The person who doesn't, or the person who had a lot of negative side effects, who maybe feels ashamed, doesn't go and post more about all the negative things that happen because they're ashamed about it. So you're only seeing one side of the coin, the quote unquote positive one. And that's what's coming across now. And there's the dark side of things, the negative side is rarely posted because people are ashamed of what happened there. They made a mistake. And because we're social beings, we think I must be the only one because no one else is talking about these issues. So yeah, we've come to, in a certain sense, a place of much more transparency, but there's a massive distortion from my perspective as to what's actually happening with people that go deep to the dark side and start using lots of drugs. It's being overly positively presented in a very distorted way online. So I'll leave it at that. You've got lots to translate.
No, don't worry. We will back to you in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Allora, per il pubblico a casa, quello che Scott ha detto è stato interessante da due punti di vista e che conferma quello che è lo sforzo che hanno sempre fatto persone come Alberto, Gabriele, anche Simone da quando si è unito alla compagnia, quello dell'educazione dal punto di vista del consumatore per quanto riguarda le performance enhanced drug. Ha fatto l'esempio di Boston Lloyd, che è qualcuno che si è fatto trasportare dall'uso eccessivo fino a diventare ad un abuso tale che molto probabilmente è stato la causa della sua morte. Ricordo a tutti che Boston Lloyd è morto a 29 anni per colpa, mi sembra, di un problema cardiaco probabilmente causato da una estrema forma di ipertensione causata dal fatto che lui era in uno stage finale per quanto riguardava kidney disease, quindi in qualche maniera causato da se stesso dopo probabilmente essersi iniettato un peptide in maniera sbagliata. Comunque questa è la storia. E ha fatto l'esempio di due fratelli che avevano di 18-20 anni mentre faceva un seminario si chiamava Pharmacology 101 al Body Power, quindi in Inghilterra, che sono entrati in contatto con lui perché volevano ringraziarlo per aver parlato di queste cose, anche se lui stesso ammette che il seminario era estremamente basilare, ma nonostante tutto i tempi erano tali per cui le persone avevano bisogno di sentire certe informazioni e quelle informazioni questi fratelli non gli erano state date, non avevano trovate, e di conseguenza si erano ritrovati ad essere, perlomeno uno dei due, ipogonatico all'età di 18-19 anni, non sostenuti dal sistema sanitario nazionale, e di conseguenza hanno detto: se avessimo saputo che cosa rischiavamo probabilmente non avremmo neanche cominciato. Quindi una conferma diretta del fatto che l'educazione è sempre la cosa giusta da fare. Poi dice giustamente: puoi salvare alcuni ma non puoi salvarne tutti, quindi se qualcuno vive con frustrazione questo evento, come per esempio nella domanda d'Alberto, è normale, ma l'idea di poter salvare tutti in qualche maniera fallace, quindi uno deve cercare di prendere le vittorie dove arrivano, e già quindi sicuramente questo è stato qualcosa che è stato fatto da persone come gli eminenti esponenti del bodybuilding italiano in questa chat. Poi io gli ho fatto una domanda a proposito del fatto che lui ha la possibilità di accedere a almeno tre tipi di mercato per quanto riguarda il bodybuilding, quello statunitense, quello inglese e quello tedesco, perché Scott parla un ottimo tedesco e fa spesso podcast in tedesco, e ha detto che la differenza c'è a proposito dell'uso e consumo, è enorme, ma generalmente parlando ha notato soprattutto che c'è una maggiore esposizione sui social media per quanto riguarda le sostanze, ma questa esposizione viene in qualche maniera, c'è un bias di conferma e quello che chiama un bias di selezione. In altre parole, andiamo a cercare quello che vogliamo sentire e andiamo a vedere quello che vogliamo vedere. E Scott ha giustamente fatto notare che siccome le persone tendono a vergognarsi dei problemi, tendono a vergognarsi di quello che non funziona, tendiamo di solito a vedere soltanto le cose che funzionano bene in qualche maniera. Si è creato una sorta di mercato dei farmaci che fanno vedere soltanto il risultato positivo, e quello che poi è negativo viene in qualche maniera messo sotto il tappeto, perché le persone si vergognano di parlare dei loro problemi, della depressione, della rottura delle relazioni, di quello che non funziona. E quindi è un grosso bias di conferma che va a minare tutto il lavoro di educazione che si fanno altre persone, perché uno tenta di educare naturalmente sui lati negativi, non c'è bisogno di educare sui lati positivi, però poi quello che il ragazzo vede è sempre e comunque un bias di conferma in positivo di quello che i farmaci permettono. Questo a grandi linee direi ciò che ha fatto. Grazie Scott.
Io avrei una domanda a tal riguardo per Scott, e la domanda è questa: visto che diciamo gli Stati Uniti stanno sempre anni luce avanti a noi per tutto quello che è, per qualsiasi cosa, e in questo caso per il discorso del diffondersi di questi personaggi tipo Boston Lloyd e compagnia cantante, che da noi fortunatamente ancora non si palesano, vorrei sapere se a livello legale, visto che in America c'è comunque più tolleranza, c'è stata una risposta sia sociale sia a livello proprio del governo su questo diffondersi a macchia d'olio della diffusione su tutti i social dell'abuso di anabolizzanti e relative morti giovani. Ecco.
Okay. Scott, Simone has a very interesting question regarding the consequences of this overexposure, alluring about the PEDs. But from his perspective, is a question regarding the legal, and so not just the social, but the legal consequences. Having characters like Boston Lloyd, who somebody can see talking about showing. In Italy, we still don't have that kind of extremes, but we are definitely going in that direction. Yeah. Since Simone make us notice that everything happening in the UK, in the USA, is always, how can I say, the forefront of what's going to happen to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So, from your perspective, from your experience, have you seen a change, not just a societal, but also a legal, judicial change in the way the PEDs are seen, are counteracted, in the way the government is acting? Because effectively, bodybuilding screams, "I'm illegal. I'm illegal. Yeah. I'm illegal." You know.
Yeah, I wish I could conjure Rick Collins right now. He's
yes, please.
He's the expert. Yeah, Rick's a great guy. If you would ever want to have him on, he might be willing to do it. I could talk to him. Sorry, Rick. I didn't mean to hang out there like that. But Rick's an awesome human being.
I think I've seen every interview with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. You know, I think what seems like it happens, and I catch wind of this on occasion, is to some degree, it kind of depends on like the current politicians, the current political winds, which way they're blowing. But they do gather information, and there are drug busts. And I'm no expert in this. This is where Rick could probably go through and recount all the drug busts that happen. But they do watch, and then when money's come available, there are major drug busts that happen. So they pay attention to who's doing what online. It's so easy. You're basically incriminating yourself when you do this. Now, legally, whether it's illegal to show yourself injecting an oily substance, I don't know if that's illegal, but obviously everyone knows what you're doing and what's going on there. So then you become a person who's being watched, right? And eventually, and there's, this has been going on for a while. I've personally been witness to infiltrations on bodybuilding boards. There was what was his name? There was a guy on a old school bodybuilding board, Professional Muscle, that still exists.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I want to say his name was something fat. It had FAT or PHAT. I can't remember, but he came on. He used pictures that he had stolen from someone else. He created an online persona. He spent years and years and years there, becoming a person of note, a person to listen to. He had connections with all the moderators. Everyone trusted him. People were referring to him. And it turned out he was a reporter who was doing some sort of a story. I never saw the story, but then he vanished. He basically said, by the way, here's who I am. And he'd been there for 3 years. He was one of the most highly respected members on the boards. So when people put themselves out there, they become then people of interest, and then they become watched. And then if the money is available and the ins and outs, Simona, I wish I knew a better answer to that, but eventually there are busts that happen periodically. But generally speaking, they're going after the dealers. So someone who's doing that, as long as they're not dealing, which some of them probably are, then they'll pay attention to that person, figure out who they're connected with, and then seek out the dealers and, try to cut off the tree at the trunk rather than the branches, and then stop the drug dealing if they're being smart about it. But right now, right now we've got so much chaos going in the United States. I don't even want to touch on that. But yeah, it's become more and more acceptable, but it just makes it easier, I think, for law enforcement to enforce if they so choose to do it. And I think a lot of times we don't hear about the drug dealers because they try to stay anonymous. And they're not, some of them are, but they're not on the public boards per se. Some of them are, but some of them are not. And then when they get busted, we don't hear about it because they were just an anonymous person, in some state far away. And their customers don't say, oh my God, my dealer got busted, because then they're implicated themselves. So everyone just hushes down. So drug busts are happening, but they're kept quiet by the bodybuilders themselves because they don't want to be the next person to have someone knocking at their door. So, but yeah, it's getting where I'm really surprised. Last thing I'll say, I'm really surprised that more people who just tell exactly what they're doing, large, well-known influencers who are easy to find, they're not all just being arrested. I've been sort of flabbergasted by that for quite a while. But that's maybe just the way of the world these days. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm confused as well, to be honest.
Andrea, super sintetico.
Sì, la risposta è stata che c'è maggiore visibilità, socialmente sono più in qualche maniera considerati, sono più accettati, ma sono un'eccellente occasione per le forze dell'ordine interne di raccogliere informazioni, sanno tutto di tutti, di che succede. Poi però chi effettivamente viene beccato tendono ad essere soprattutto i dealer e non i piccoli consumatori. E poi ha fatto l'esempio del fatto che c'era una volta su un sito che si chiama Professional Muscle un giornalista che si è finto essere un utente per anni, che ha raccolto informazioni ed è scomparso ed era diventato un utente di riferimento e di fiducia in tutto quanto il sito. Ma comunque lui dice tendono a privilegiare, forse anche per una questione di manpower, cioè di quante persone possono metterci a disposizione, tendono a privilegiare il controllo e tendono a privilegiare le retate da parte della grande distribuzione, non del piccolo consumatore. Questo è più o meno quello che succede negli Stati Uniti adesso.
Okay, let's go just a little bit more technical. Doc Gabri, the question about peri-workout is yours.
Scott, here
Yes.
is your word, peri-workout nutrition. You was the first one after Meadows starts of theories from the past to write about peri-workout nutrition. This is yours. You gave the real lesson, the real rules about it.
Yes.
Can you say first of all how and when you
Gli chiedere come state?
Yeah, sì.
Gabriele would like to know how and when or why you started with your peri-workout nutrition idea and how we evolved.
There is, I think he's still around. I think we're Facebook friends. There is a retired professor. Actually, he's he's a discus thrower. He was in the years, named Thomas Fahey.
Yes, I remember. Yes, I
Yeah.
remember when you said you.
And
you
I've
talked
mentioned
about
him.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He was an author on a couple of the undergraduate exercise physiology texts.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, and he had a book. It was, I think, it was the Anabolic Steroid Alternative Handbook or something like that. It wasn't a play off of the Underground Steroid Handbook by Duchesne. It was just a book that he wrote, not trying to compare it to Duchesne. And he had sort of a theory that he put forth. He called it insulin loading. And the idea being the state of the science of that showed that insulin was very anti-proteolytic. So it inhibited protein degradation and then was very anabolic as well. It was just considered a very, very anabolic form, especially in terms of glycogen and carbohydrate metabolism. So I remember, that might have been I got that book when I was a teenager. I read that book when I was a teenager, when I was
Sorry, Scott, 1 second. I'm very sorry. Just for the Italian public. La domanda che Gabriele voleva fare era a proposito della peri-workout nutrition, come è cominciata e come si è evoluta. Sorry,
sì, lui ha fatto che sono ancora tuttora pubblici su LTS Fitness,
Yes.
sono 3 mega articoli, lì c'è dentro tutta la letteratura possibile nel dettaglio per quanto riguarda macro e micronutrienti e la motivazione, il come, perché è un testo di pura essenza fisiologia e biochimica dell'arte del bodybuilding.
Sorry, Scott.
No.
We were just translating, and then Gabriele obviously made very clear that he wanted to remember to the public that there are still your 3-part article on Elite FST. Yes. About your pre-workout nutrition, and Gabriele used a huge amount of compliment to detail how detailed and referenced the whole article was. So please, to you.
Yeah, that was the first series of art. That was the first article. It's 3 parts that I wrote there. And when I still draw from that information, there hasn't been a lot of active research in the area. In my mind, a lot of the questions have been answered. That doesn't mean there aren't many more things to be answered, and always replication is important. But no, I first read that book by Thomas Fahey, and I came across it. I think I might have gone home, and it was in my library in my bedroom, and he talked about taking in massive amounts of carbohydrate. So I might have been doing that when I was a teenager. I'm not sure. But then of course Milos made it well known, and he was doing that, and that sort of confirmed the idea. So I don't know when this is a good question. I don't know when I first started using intra-workouts, but I started trialing them with clients, with people I was personal training a lot at the time before I was even doing much online coaching. And then with myself, and I know you've heard me say this before, that at one point I worked up to over 2,000 calories in an intra-workout in the context of 6,000 calories a day. So that was a lot of food, but just to see what effect that would have. So that was sort of the origin. And in the meantime, and we could do an entire podcast talking about intra-workout nutrition. In the meantime, there are some really well-done studies that substantiate the effects of protein, carbohydrate, both components, or both of them being even better, that substantiate the impact of the timing per se being around the workout or peri-workout versus just some other time of the day. In terms of changes in, almost everything, changes in protein breakdown with 3-methylhistidine, changes in protein synthesis as measured in the muscle cells, changes in fat-free mass with indirect calorimetry, changes in type 1, type 2, type 2X fiber size. That's actually graded. There's a series of studies by Bird et al. From about 2006, 2008, where protein and carbohydrate alone were good, and the two in combination actually was essential amino acids was even better. So there's some good pieces of evidence. There are some studies that don't show any difference with an intra-workout or a peri-workout recovery supplement. And there's reasons why that might be as well. One of the things that isn't as well controlled for, and I always mention this, and this is why people who like, I tried that, didn't do anything, it just upset my stomach, I saw nothing, is that the idea, the mechanism whereby this would work is that those nutrients are available during your workout. So if you're someone, for instance, who ate a substantial meal an hour before a workout, and then you've got elevated insulin, elevated glucose, elevated essential amino acids, maybe not the entire workout, but 2/3, 3/4 of it. And then you start basically adding food into workout. And then that last portion of the workout is then better fueled, so to speak. That's not that big of a difference. You wouldn't notice anything.
You're already doing the pre and intra.
You've already got the pre and intra, right? You already covered most of what's important, having the nutrients available. So what really seems one way to test this out is if someone structured their meals and maybe added that intra as a meal. There's lots of things I could go into here, but what I've noticed is when people think they maybe see some effect, and then they remove it, they notice acutely, this could be a placebo effect, but they notice acutely their performance goes down. There's some studies by Green et al. Showing a performance effect of carbohydrate. We could go into more mechanistic stuff. Something about reducing cortisol is very, very important in this, based on some studies from Australia. But when people remove an intra-workout and put the calories elsewhere, they notice performance will go down, and they notice they just don't seem to recover as well. So that's another big piece of evidence. But there's good studies showing an effect. I'm pretty convinced by it. In some circumstances, when you're well fed, it makes no difference. But if someone doesn't like to go into their workout having had a meal an hour beforehand, and they can use an intra-workout and train with that, and you can get used to it, it can be a really, really nice way to basically hack the system, which is what we're doing with bodybuilding anyway.
Scott, voglio intercettare una cosa con Scott. So would you be, and then obviously I can translate anything Gabriele wants, because when it comes to peri-workout, you two guys are gods on earth here. This is just a question that I have. So for the public. So would you say it would be fair to say that it's always a good idea having a good peri-workout strategy, because best case scenario, it helps. Worst case scenario, it doesn't hit any results. It doesn't have any drawbacks. It doesn't have any pitfalls.
That's a good rule to apply. It depends on the greater context. So
yes,
if for instance you're trying to drop body fat and you need to have a caloric deficit, I wouldn't add in an intra-workout, because that runs counter to that goal, right?
But you can push calories from one side of the day and put into the intra. You
Absolutely.
have far more likely
Absolutely.
to be...
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So, for someone who's been training and they're well fed during their workout, they're okay with that, and that works for them. And in the situation where they'd rather eat more food, so someone's dieting down and they just want to eat real food, there's some benefits to that too, potentially for your microbiome and what have you. But yeah, it's the negatives that could come is that you have some gastric distress during your workout, but that can be managed. We've got so many options now that can be managed. You will adapt to the intra-workout. When I talk about the 2,000 calories plus, I didn't jump right into that. I worked my way up to it. So if your workout is being adversely affected by an intra-workout, obviously you wouldn't want to do that. But yeah, I think there's very little to be lost and potentially something to be gained, because in some of these studies that I mentioned, they've looked at total caloric intake, and total caloric intake wasn't increased by the intra-workout. one of the studies, they gave a supplement and they timed it pre and post workout compared to taking it split across the morning and the evening. And there was a timing effect on body composition. So,
not to mention the Roseneck study with a 2,000 calories.
Yeah, well, that's there too. Yeah, that was right.
That's where the serial gain, the serial nation start about, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes. This is a serial gains nation. Yes, and that's an outlier amongst the studies. The Roseneck is like a real, very, very impressive. There are others that haven't shown that. This is what you see in the research literature. As a last thought on that, the question, as a competitive bodybuilder, if we're thinking about people who are really trying to push the limits, get everything they possibly can, you're looking for clues. You're looking for things that might work, that maybe worked for you, maybe didn't work for someone else. So for some people, for Tom Platt's barbell squats were the ticket to probably the best legs we've ever seen, right? Or still up there, right? For some people, barbell squats just don't work. That's not the right tool for them. If you look at the scientific research, you'll see that for some people for some studies or for some individuals, the intra-workout didn't work, but it might be something that could work for you. So even if you see, in my opinion, you see a mixed body of literature where a meta-analysis wouldn't show any effect. Looking at reps in reserve versus training to failure. The meta-analysis says it doesn't matter. But some studies did and some studies didn't. And for some individuals, it might have, and some individuals it didn't. So even in my mind, to some degree, if you're looking to optimize everything, uncover every rock, even if it's just 1 out of 10 people that get a positive benefit out of intervention X, Y, or Z, whatever it might be. And it's not just something just completely ludicrous, like, standing on your head and saying the alphabet backwards underwater in the pool, right?
Which is a big feature, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's a placebo effect there. But if there's some studies that show something may have worked and you thought through all the details, then there's evidence that there's some possibility it could work for you. So it's worth considering in my mind. It's a different question being asked by a study with a group of people versus the question that's being asked by the individual. The study asked, from this sample we've taken, if we pick someone else from that same population, would we expect that this intervention would work? And if the study suggests, yeah, then you would expect that. It doesn't mean it will, right? The question the individual asks is, will this work for me? And if the study, for instance, shows it worked for 50% of the people and didn't work for the other 50%, that means it worked for half the people. Maybe it'll work. Maybe I'm amongst that half. So that's worth considering because the question asked is different than the question the individual has in many cases.
Absolutely. So unless I'm going to double check if somebody has a question and then I'll translate. Volete dire qualcosa? C'è qualcosa che volete?
No, ribatto io, ma prima traduci, se no siamo andati troppo lunghi.
Ok. Allora, Scott, qui si sta parlando della peri-workout nutrition. In Italia il maestro della questione è ovviamente Gabriele e per quanto riguarda all'estero è Scott, quindi qualsiasi cosa potete fare riferimento a loro. Io mi accontento di una banale traduzione. Il discorso di Scott sulla peri-workout è un discorso che va dal semplice multitasking, vale a dire la possibilità di introdurre così tante calorie da considerarlo come un pasto, e lui fa l'esempio di quando aveva raggiunto le 6.000 calorie, perciò aveva creato nel tempo un intra-workout da 2.000 calorie, in maniera tale quindi da riuscire a ottimizzare il tempo dell'allenamento anche per il cibo. Ha una serie di fattori che vengono confermati dalla letteratura scientifica che non è al 100%, ma è in grande parte concorda sul fatto che c'è un vantaggio dal punto di vista performativo, dal punto di vista cognitivo, dal punto di vista neurologico, dal punto di vista del recupero, dal punto di vista della muscle protein synthesis, dal punto di vista dell'iperinsulinemia che ne deriva e quindi della degradazione proteica. In altre parole, la peri-workout è qualcosa che può assolutamente far parte della cultura del bodybuilding moderno e, come stavamo appunto dicendo con Scott, è qualche cosa che a meno di cappelle clamorose, come per esempio pasti smodati prima dell'allenamento e poi si aggiunge la peri-workout e quindi si fa qualche cosa che determina un deperimento della performance, ma eccezione fatta per questi errori che chiunque con un minimo di sé non dovrebbe essere in grado di considerare e non fare, non ci sono veri effetti negativi nella peri-workout. Quindi si tratta di semplicemente provarla, aggiustarla su se stessi, come giustamente Scott poi aveva detto, non bisogna essere troppo accecati dal discorso della scientificità, perché la scientificità, lui dice, si fa la domanda se una cosa funziona in generale. Voi come atleti dovete farvi la domanda se questa cosa funziona per voi, e l'unico modo per farlo è quello di settarla in maniera educata nel senso quindi che sapete quello che state facendo, provarla, trarre le vostre conseguenze e modificarla se necessario. Però Scott naturalmente è parte fondamentale del suo programma, ha assolutamente confermato il valore di una ragionata e ben fatta peri-workout nutrition, prima, durante e dopo, certamente. Quindi a me...
I've got 3 questions, but the first one is a statement, not a question.
Okay.
Me and Gabriele talked about many times in podcast of the right nutrition and timing to allow the peri-workout nutrition work. So if you eat junk in Italy, dark chocolate, pre-workout, and stupid things like that, okay, are really often used by young people. And always the timing of as you said, the timing of the pre-workout solid meal is really important. In forced feeding in a bulk, someone is really bloated, so during the workout and it's not absorbed there, so doesn't feel the pump. We talk about really many times in podcast. The second question is, I saw in my experience that obviously you don't know, but I'm around a maniac of sympathetic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. So tiny people with real high activation of sympathetic nervous system, I saw that these guys are someone that really need carbs intra-workout, because in this tiny person, if cortisol, but for the most part adrenaline and noradrenaline goes too high, they wasted the workout. And this is the first question, if you agree.
Yeah, there's a study that I would love to see all these studies replicated, but this one. There's actually some couple studies I can think of now. One of which the bird study demonstrated this as well. So carbohydrates in particular will blunt the cortisol elevation that you get from a resistance training exercise. In both of these studies, they use Gatorade, as it turned out. I'm not saying that Gatorade is what you need to use to do this. I would imagine that glucose would do it too. The actual sugar composition of Gatorade is kind of a mystery. But in doing that, yeah, it would make sense that if someone is, as you said, more of a sympathetically oriented person, they're a high stress person, they have a high anticipatory response. I tend to have that too. I once did a graded exercise test when I was in graduate school. And this was the first time I ever did an exercise test on a treadmill. We're going to test my VO2 max. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be hard. This is going to be a bitch. Here we go. And I was just standing there, and they're getting my resting heart rate, and it was 120 beats per minute. Just standing still. I wasn't doing anything. And it took like 10 minutes for my heart rate to actually go above that because I had so much sympathetic activation. So back to the studies in the Tarpenning study, it's from Australia. This was actually his dissertation research as well. They gave roughly 50 grams of Gatorade dispersed throughout a resistance exercise workout during a period of training. I think it was 12 weeks. And what they saw was that there was a reduction in the cortisol. So when insulin goes up, cortisol, those two hormones will act antagonistic to one another.
How many grams?
About 50 grams.
50
it was
grams.
based on body weight, so it would have been about 50 grams for a large bodybuilder. Wasn't very much, right?
No, not so much. No.
Yeah. So, like, one of the things with cortisol, the more intense the exercise, the more effortful the exercise, the more stressful the exercise. So, you take one exercise bout and you do it in the heat, you'll have greater cortisol release. If you do it actually in extreme cold, you'll have greater cortisol release. So, the more stressful the exercise, the more cortisol. And part of the reason for that is cortisol helps liberate fat to some degree, but it also helps with gluconeogenesis. So it has some helps with fuel homeostasis during the exercise, and it's just a stress hormone. It also has some cognitive effects. But if you have insulin available, well, insulin's there is to counter the glucose. So you don't need something promoting gluconeogenesis when you've got plenty of glucose around. So carbohydrate and insulin will keep that cortisol level reduced. And what they did, there's a small number of subjects, and there was a variable extent to which the cortisol was suppressed by the carbs. So they had groups that got no carbohydrate. Some subjects got no carbohydrate. Some subjects got carbohydrate. And when they plotted the relationship between type 1 fiber growth and type 2 fiber growth versus cortisol during the workout, there was an inverse relationship, and the correlation for one of the fiber types was like 0.83, really high correlation. So the more cortisol was suppressed, the more they grew. They saw the same thing in terms of suppression of cortisol in the Bird et al. Studies too. So especially carbohydrate does that. Actually, you can get some elevation in cortisol a little bit with essential amino acids, or it'll stay about the same, even though insulin is elevated. That's because of gluconeogenesis. But when you have carbs in your intra-workout, you suppress the cortisol, and that seems to at least be strongly associated with how much you grow. So what you said is a really keen insight, because the people who are super stressed about their workouts are going to have more cortisol, and those people might also be the ones who train harder. I don't know. Or maybe they're the ones who are walking around in circles between their sets and increasing cortisol even more so. So the more they could suppress cortisol during that workout, the better. And the thing at least the thing that I'm not sure I've seen anyone else talk about this, but the thing that's important there is that that cortisol has acute effects, but it's a steroid hormone. So its effects on protein metabolism are going to last for hours and hours and hours during the recovery period. So if you keep that elevation at bay during the workout, you're going to have a better protein balance during the many, many hours after the workout. So that's the physiological hormonal hack that I think you're talking about, that is really, really kind of cool. It's just carbohydrates, not even protein. Proteins, if I had to choose one or the other, I might lean towards protein, but carbohydrate also, especially based on that study, has a beneficial effect on muscle growth, not just acutely on protein synthesis or balance, but on muscle growth over the course of a training period. That's an impressive study, I think.
Scott, with or without essential amino acid?
In the Tarpenning study, it was just carbohydrate.
Just carbohydrate, okay.
Just carbohydrate. Okay. In the Bird et al. Series, they had a placebo. They had 6 grams of essential amino acids. I think 40 grams of carbs, and then they combined the two.
Yes.
And the data was really clean. Like the changes in protein synthesis were better with the combination versus either of those. The changes in 3-methylhistidine, so protein degradation. It was a dose response in terms of fiber growth, in terms of fat-free. Everything basically showed the combo was better than either of those two things, essential amino acids or carbohydrate alone. So, and then placebo was the worst.
In your book, inside your book, there is this study.
Yeah. It's people who don't have the book, they can go to that Elite FTS review. Yeah.
Andrea qua hai citato questo studio qua importantissimo, dove esprime come la combinazione carboidrati con aminoacidi essenziali ha questo effetto driver multifattoriale su cui quello che è tutti gli effetti a cascata dopo.
Gabriele, correggimi se sbaglio. I'm sorry, Scott, I'm just asking a question.
No, no.
In quello stesso studio la differenza era gigantesca, ma tra il placebo e il carboidrato c'era una differenza sostanziale infinita. Il carboidrato più gli aminoacidi essenziali, la differenza c'era, ma non altrettanto sostanziale. Vero?
Esatto.
Credo che ci sia persino la tabella sul libro di Scott a proposito di questa cosa.
È chiarissimo.
Okay.
È chiarissimo questo. Il concetto di Scott è il fatto che ci sia questa di fondo la modulazione parla, non parliamo di sopra, parliamo di modulazione del cortisolo, che poi dopo, diciamo, tiene alla base, no? Come dicono loro, tiene sotto controllo quello che è poi l'impatto di enfasi driver sulla sintesi proteica, su tutto quello che riguarda l'anticatabolico e la successiva stimolazione.
Second part of the question. Many athletes say to me, I'm training better with empty stomach. I lift more weight, I do some reps more. But always say this, maybe you train better with empty stomach. But if you use just a little bit of intra-workout, not too much to get too bloated and you can train, but just a little bit, maybe with exogenous insulin. You train just a little bit less stronger, but you build more muscle.
Yeah, this it's very hard unless you're doing a really good job of isolating everything. This is the thing, like when people are in their off season, they're changing numerous things because we're trying to optimize all the way. So the way to really know that would be to keep everything the same and just change the one thing. Ideally, and we'll start at the smallest intervention. There's in the Bird et al. Study, they use 6 grams of essential amino acids at the beginning of the workout. So it wasn't even a peri-workout. It was just at the very beginning of the workout. 6 grams is nothing. Like that's just a little mini scoop, right? That's just enough to flavor your water. It would just be flavored water. That's not going to upset anyone's stomach. And that did have an effect. That was better than placebo in most of the measurements. So, and then I think it was 20 grams of carbs. I got the study right here. Let's see. Where is it?
Hey, while you are checking for the study,
40,
I translate the answer. Okay, Scott?
Yeah, sure. I've already found it.
Translate the question.
Yep.
La traduzione precedente l'ha fatta Gabriele, che ovviamente se si parla di peri-workout io non aggiungo niente, anzi, grazie. E la domanda di Alberto invece era relativamente al fatto che Alberto ha notato che molti dei suoi atleti, o in generale molti atleti, dicono di riuscire a performare meglio in allenamento e di sentirsi meglio se si allenano a stomaco vuoto, ma Alberto gli fa sempre notare che poi alla fine il risultato migliore in termini di pura massa muscolare arriva se anche la performance è leggermente ridotta in palestra, ma c'è un intra-workout o c'è una peri-workout nutrition alla base. E questo è quello che adesso Scott stava cercando di rispondere. Back to you, Scott. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm all for whatever lets people train as hard as possible. So for some of those individuals, maybe they've had a meal an hour ahead of time or an hour and a half. So you might be able to give them a meal beforehand so that they're quote unquote fed during the workout, and then they get to train just drinking water and they're better off. I might also ask how hot it is. The hotter it is, the higher body temperature is going to go. The more you're going to be sympathetically activated, the less your digestion is going to be able to help with the motility needed and everything that's needed to absorb an intra-workout. So if they're training in the summer in southern Italy in an unair-conditioned gym, it's going to be hard, right? But you can get used to things. So you could, you could buy a kilo of essential amino acids would last you like, 180 workouts, something like that. If 6 grams, that's nothing, right? So they could start with that and then work their way up. It was 40 grams of carbs in that particular study. But they could work their way up and then add some amount of carbohydrate. And eventually at least they've seen this in cycling. So there's some controversy there, but this is what I've definitely seen in clients is that you get used to it after a while. And here's the thing too, Alberto, is that if you say I trust that your clients trust you, I imagine they do. And you say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start small, but just trust me. Give me the next 3 months, right? We're going to work. I never want you to have a workout where you feel like you can't train as hard as possible. We're going to take baby steps all the way and work our way up to a very small, this will be an intra-workout. If it's got 6 grams of essential amino acids or 10 grams of whole protein, which is what I would prefer actually, and 40 grams, there is 50 grams of protein and carbs is 200 calories. That's not a whole lot, right? You start drinking it 15 minutes beforehand, but you work your way up to that, right? And say, so just trust me, for the next 3 months, we're going to take our way up there, right? And this is maybe in a 6-month off season. And then you can say, let's stay there for a month, right? And then if you want, you can just take it out if you want to. And tell me how you feel when you take it out.
Guardate tutti, adesso faccio un complimento in generale su Scott. Guardate tutti come è passato su un sermone di biochimica applicata in maniera eccelsa sul cortisolo, insulina e tutto quello che è l'intra-workout, a renderlo così semplice, così fruibile alla portata di tutti, come sta dicendo adesso. Qua vuol dire essere maestri,
I'll translate for you after, Scott, don't worry. As usual, only good words from Gabriele.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
And what you suggested, Scott, it always worked. Always.
Oh, good. Okay, cool.
Always.
Yeah. So yeah. I think there's something to be had there for folks. It doesn't have to be much.
Scott, what kind of carb do you suggest for a class standard intra-workout? Glucose, cyclodextrin, Vitargo. What do you prefer?
I usually go with True Nutrition because they're here. Vitargo it's a
process more than a carb, isn't it?
It is. It's a patented process. You've heard me talk about this, right? And they changed their starting material. And I hate this. I'll just say the last time I bought Vitargo, it wouldn't even mix. I'm not sure what was going on. It was very, very bizarre. But I guess the first thing is, like Alberto sort of pointed towards, how much money does the person have? What do they want to do? So if that person's like, oh, my stomach is super duper sensitive, you don't want to give them glucose, right? That's going to cause issues, right? So you'd start with a highly branched cyclic dextrin, a cyclodextrin, and start with a small amount, right? Ask them what their favorite flavor is. What flavor do they like? Yes. I mean, a lot of this is psychological, right? So make sure that it's introduced to them in a way that they like, so they see it as a positive thing, right? I've had clients in the past who just didn't have the money, and they went with whey concentrate and dextrose, right? Okay. But they got used to it, right? They worked up to like 800 calorie intra-workouts. And for them, that was actually because it was so cheap to buy large amounts of that. They were getting a quarter of their calories from whey concentrate and dextrose. And it was cheap for them. It was a very cheap source of food. Mm-hmm. They were eating chicken and rice and that sort of stuff too, the cheapest food they could get. So
there is nothing wrong with dextrose and the intra-workout. Interesting.
It's going to become glucose anyway, really. Excellent. So that's the thing. Just the dextrose tends to cause bloating, right?
Andrea's just kidding me because I love dextrose.
Okay, there you go.
Alberto's been a great proponent of simple dextrose for the majority of people. If you start small, you're exactly theory. If you start small and give it time, it becomes a perfectly working source of carbohydrate into workout.
That's why I went up to over 2,000 calories to say, like, Like, so, oh wait, you can't, like 800 calories is the most anyone. Like, no, I went over 2,000. I did that for a long time. Now I know that's not going to be tested in a study, right? No, you're not going to, you can't launch people into that. You're not going to say, we're going to see if we can work you up over 2,000 calories during a workout. That would be inhumane. It wouldn't get passed by a research review committee. But I wanted to do that just to see. It's like, so if I'm consulting with someone, say it can be done. It may not be something you can do, but now I've gone pretty far with these things, and I have not only the research understanding but the personal experience. So you can absolutely use glucose, right? I mean, a lot of the sports technology we have is there because people want to make profit, right? And I like, this is another topic, but I'm a big proponent of, if you're going to use a fat burner or you're going to use supplements, buy whenever possible the raw materials rather than things that are prepackaged for you. So then you know what you're using. And then as you compete year after year, you can come back to the same formula that you created yourself. And you're not relying upon, I had this fat burner that worked great for 2 years, and now the company went belly up. The company went broke, and now I can't get that product anymore. And I don't know what's in there because it was all proprietary blends, right?
In the UK, we had this with, have you ever heard of the Jack 3D?
Yes.
Workout?
Yeah.
Yes, we had the one. It was basically the gym was a place where people seems to be on speed for a while.
Yeah.
that's how strong it was.
No, that's,
and then it was
powerful.
taken off the market.
Right.
And it was at the same time where it was sold also the I can't remember exactly which one it was, but there's the Super Drug. It was sold as as a pro hormone because it was escaping the legislation.
Right.
And so there was that moment where in the gym plates were never enough for people, apparently. So even commercial gym had a lacking of plates. It was impossible. And then the government realized what was going on, and they started to take off the market.
Right. And
anyway, are you okay if I translate this?
Please. Please do.
La domanda di Alberto era ovviamente relativamente a sempre sulla pre-workout e nutrition, sull'importanza del timing, delle fonti, e Scott ha parlato fondamentalmente, la cosa si può tradurre nel fatto che bisogna abituarci, e ci si può, e lo studio stesso dimostra, e qui è arrivato il complimento di Gabriele, come Scott è passato da una lezione di biologia a una lezione meramente pratica dal punto di vista come educare le persone, come insegnargli. Si può cominciare anche soltanto con 6 grammi di questo semplice utilizzo di essenziali. Poi lui ha specificato che avrebbe preferito addirittura vedere 10 grammi di proteine in polvere. Posso immaginare che le idrolizzate siano la soluzione migliore, ma lui ha anche detto che si può lavorare poco alla volta con delle proteine concentrate e i carboidrati possono salire poco alla volta. L'esempio di Alberto era relativamente anche al fatto che ci sono persone che hanno un tale sympathetic drive, una tale carica del sistema simpatico per cui hanno bisogno di un certo quantitativo di carboidrati anche intra-workout. Di conseguenza questa è l'uso di questi carboidrati è una qualità, anche per chi non è abituato, a cui ci si può abituare se si lavora in maniera molto graduale. Bisogna fare in modo di non rovinare la performance, come ha detto il dottor Scott, ma è qualcosa per cui vale sicuramente la pena farlo, e adesso Scott finirà la domanda. Please, Scott, back to you.
Okay, what was I going to say? I think,
please.
Yeah, there's so many products that are out there. Here's the thought that I had. So this is something that is even more difficult now than it was. Gosh, part of the reason why I went and got my PhD, and one of my goals when I was still in the research world, was eventually to start sort of attacking the industry where people are being sold all sorts of things they don't need, with all like the fake science that was used in lots of advertisements, and try to actually do some scientific research to dispel myths and those sorts of things. So there's been products, there's been people selling things, trying to sell products to bodybuilders that they don't need for years and years and years. And it's even more difficult now to see through that because there's so many products, there's so many intra-workouts, to come back to this topic, that are available. And you don't necessarily know what's in there, but you can make your own intra-workout. You can compose all of those things. You can make your own fat burner for the most part. If you can get those individual, if you can buy the fat burner with those ingredients, you can get those individual ingredients. And the big picture thing that's really, really hard to see in an industry and an online environment that's very, very immediate gratification driven. And we are creatures of immediate gratification. That's just the nature of what it means to be human, is to think, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years, and what do I need to get? So I'm loading up my my trailer, my motorhome, and I'm going to be on the road for quite a while. I'm putting everything in there, right? And I've got a trailer. I'm calling it my survival trailer. And I've got tools in there. I've got a refrigerator in there. I've set it up so it's going to be air conditioned. I'm trying to pack everything that I could possibly need, or most things at least, so that I don't have to take a trip to the store every day to get something, because I might not have a solid address. So bodybuilding has probably helped me with this process, because when you're entering into bodybuilding, as opposed to, I'm going to just take a bunch of steroids so I can be ready for the summer, the question, or the perspective that I like to convey is, so how can I do this to look and feel good as long as possible for as many decades of my life as possible? And if I'm going to compete, how can I gather together all the things I need for the long haul? Because maybe I'm not going to be like Phil Heath and get my pro card in my 3rd year of competing. It may take me a while if I ever get that good. So I want to figure out what are the things I'm going to need if I'm going to use supplements. I'm going to probably use an intra-workout. I'm probably going to have some kind of a fat burner. I may have some sort of a sleep supplement to help me go to sleep. I may have a fiber supplement. I may have a multivitamin, what have you. Where do I get those things so that when I want to navigate, I'm getting massive feedback.
Qualcuno.
Turn my volume down a little bit.
Okay.
That's better.
Perfect now.
So that when I'm in year 3 and I'm like, okay, now I want to add carbohydrate because I've gotten bigger to my intra-workout. Well, I can't do that if I have an intra-workout that comes from company X, because I just add one more scoop and I get everything else. And now that's much more expensive than just adding dextrose. So if you think about the long haul, the more things you have personally packed into your suitcase that you know are there, the more you can be self-reliant, the more you can have control over which way you're going with your supplementation. The more you know about training personally, as opposed to someone else's plan, let's say, the more you can control your own training. My training system is very, very much about auto-regulation. You choose the exercises, you choose the volume, you choose the version. It's about you steering your own ship. So like to bring around some of the themes we talked about in terms of an intra-workout, you can buy, there are lots of good products that are out there. You may just have to find another one, and you may have to realize, okay, this product isn't the same. Maybe it's got more of this than the other. I'll tell a story that Gabriella will probably appreciate. So I bought a product that an intra-workout that had agmatine in it, right?
Yeah, agmatine sulfate.
Yeah. And but I was taking in a large intra-workout at the time. And I said, I'm going to just try this product out. It was, I'm not going to say which product it was, but it was a product. I knew the person who developed it, and I was trying to help them. So I bought that sort of to support their business. And I took like at least twice, and it was built into the product. That was in the blend, but I needed more calories. And I also did this when I just started taking yohimbine at the beginning of a prep. Agmatine and yohimbine have interactions that are not good. You don't want to take those two things together. right? And I found this out the hard way. So I'd taken a heavy dose of agmatine. I would have been fine, probably, but I also was taking yohimbine, right? So I wasn't going to give up on yohimbine. It seems like it's worked for fat loss for me. So I just had to throw away that intra-workout. I couldn't use it because I can't take those two things together. It was a good intention, but when you buy a prepackaged formula that's full of proprietary blends, to some degree, you give up your freedom to you're creating a supplement and a pharmaceutical environment in your body. So I couldn't take that because it had agmatine in it. I would have to take that on days I don't take yohimbine, for instance, or what have you. So that was this, and that workout was awful. That was probably as bad as I've ever. What is going on? I'm not this deep. I felt terrible. And then I went and researched. I'm like, okay, now I know why. So that's a worst case scenario. But in a best case scenario, when you need to make adjustments, when you need to add more protein, let's say you want to add more protein into your diet and you want to do that in your intra workout, you can obviously add a protein scoop, right? But if you got prepackaged formulas, it just limits your freedom in doing that. And along the way, the thing, and this is another level to what we talked about, the thing that happens is when you just basically choose or pick a prepackaged product. This isn't necessarily obvious right off the bat, but then the thought process that's gone into making that product, it was someone else's. Compare that to the person who says, okay, I want to have this much protein. I want to have this much carbohydrate. I want to have these bells and whistles in my intra-workout. I thought this through, and I'm paying attention to what these components do, how I feel. If I go above this much protein, I have gas for the rest of the day. My wife wants to strangle me. Whatever the problems might be, when you do that yourself, then you learn more. And each of those small opportunities to learn, when you're constructing your own training, your own diet, your own supplement regimen, add up over time. And you do that for 5, 10, 15 years. And then you have a massive amount of knowledge that, barring a brain injury, no one can take from you. And then you can control your own ship. And then if you decide to use someone else's product, you're much better equipped to make that decision because it's informed, because you've been learning along the way. So that's one of the benefits of bodybuilding, is it gives you an opportunity to learn. And I like to learn, as probably people have picked up on, to learn along the way. And you give up a little bit of that when you just take on someone else's ideas completely without having thought them through yourself. So I'll leave it there for the translation.
Il discorso fondamentale è una questione di un'analisi di principio, quello di Scott. È coerente con quello che lui ha detto di voler essere un educatore, e per essere educare devi avere delle informazioni. Tutto quello che ha detto relativamente all'intra-workout, alla peri-workout, è avere le maggiori informazioni possibili. Per farlo bisogna isolare le variabili, fare piccoli cambiamenti, raccogliere informazioni, i feedback del tuo corpo e muoversi da lì. Devi creare, e poi ha fatto l'esempio di voler creare il tuo personale intra-workout, o come ha fatto l'esempio di un integratore bruciagrassi. In altre parole, il concetto è quello di diventare quanto più autosufficienti possibile. E questa che dico adesso è un punto mio, perché so che Scott fa così. È il motivo per cui sempre di più Scott si sta concentrando, per esempio, sempre di meno sull'essere un coach e sempre di più sull'essere un troubleshooter, su delle consultazioni, perché questo gli permette di portare avanti coerentemente questo discorso. Qualcuno si presenta da lui con un problema, con una serie di informazioni e di nozioni su questo problema, e Scott lo aiuta a risolverlo portandolo verso la direzione giusta. Non è un coach che dà semplicemente la scheda per il mese, la scheda per la settimana, la dieta per la volta. E questa è stata una cosa che lui spesse volte ha detto, un'evoluzione della sua figura professionale, che è coerente con il voler scrivere, appunto, l'aver scritto un libro sull'auto, su diventare un coach di bodybuilding per se stessi, o, come ha detto adesso, sulla capacità di prendere informazioni per creare la propria personale tabella di allenamento, il proprio intra-workout. E, fondamentale, aggiungo, ha confermato quello che il buon Alberto dice, che il destrosio e il glucosio sono nel lungo periodo un'eccellente fonte di carboidrati intra-workout. Non c'è bisogno di andare a cercare niente di complicato, se ci si dà tempo. Questo è quanto.
Scott, I'm gonna make you laughing. Many years ago, 2-3 years ago, I was really curious about if naringin was really able to inhibit liver cytochromes. So I take 1.8 grams of naringin for 3 days, and the day after I take 20 milligrams of UMB. 16 hours, I felt like shit. Okay, so naringin works.
Uh-huh. Wow, interesting.
Simo, a te la domanda sull'allenamento e la scienza?
Allora, io vorrei sapere se anche in America c'è questa, diciamo, questa tendenza a rendere tutto molto scientifico, questo nuovo science-based come si vede in Italia, o se rimangono sul classico. Quantomeno da quello che vedo io, i pro si allenano sempre alla stessa maniera, però visto che lui ce l'ha di prima mano, ci può dare un'informazione più realistica.
So Simone is point out something that in Italy is becoming, I'm not going to say a problem, but something very present, which is an over-reliance from, especially from the younger generation, on science and the almost incapacity of doing anything if there is no a peer-reviewed study.
Right.
Simone is asking if this is something that is going strong in the US as well, or the US the situation is different, because as far as he can see, he sees that eventually the pros, people who really do bodybuilding, they still are stuck to the basic things that we know they work, and they must be just ruthlessly done for a decade. So he seems to be asking that this science-related thing seems to be more towards wannabe bodybuilder rather than people who actually talk the talk and walk the walk. What's your opinion? What's your impression of that?
Yeah, this is the phenomenon that is happening here as well. The term abstract scientist has been coined, and the way I see it, it's a normal facet of human nature, in that people look across what they see the landscape of evidence to be. What are the things that could possibly tell me, in this case, how to get as muscular as possible as a bodybuilder? How does that evidence, and there's actually a German researcher, his name is Gerd Gigerenzer, who has talked about this extensively. He's done some pretty cool studies to this effect, that when it comes down to it, we very often make our decisions just based on our gut feelings. Bauchgefühl, they say. And should I pause so that he can hear to translate?
No, don't worry. It's my daughter. He's calling me.
Okay, I'll keep going.
I'll be right back.
All right. So Alberto, you can translate the next round.
Yeah.
So when you see a scientific study and you see someone speaking very eloquent about this, there is a strength of evidence there, without a doubt. And the nice thing about that as well is that you have all the advantages of a scientific study. It was controlled. You had a placebo group that was controlled into placebo. It was double blinded. You could go into all the reasons why science can give us some good information. And also, it's already done. It's an easy answer because you don't have to go and try. You didn't have to be the subject. They didn't do, for instance, a crossover trial where you tried one treatment and then you tried the other treatment, or you trained one leg one way and then you trained the other leg the other way. You read the study, and it's evidence that's easy to obtain, and that's the smart choice, right? If I'll make it even simpler. If you need some oranges, right? And there's oranges in your orange tree right outside your house, you go pick them rather than go to the store to get them, right? So Simona, to get to your question, in terms of what humans are going to do, because we look to make things easier in most cases. That's just a normal human instinct. I think it's evolutionarily based. We look for the easiest way because there were plenty of stresses in our evolutionary past. There were plenty of difficulties. So it makes sense. Like, you don't walk 2 miles to get oranges when the orange tree is right there. You don't, if you see evidence that seems plausible, it's right there on the internet, and the people seem like they know what they're talking about. They seem like the leaders of your tribe because they're very certain. It makes much more sense to say, okay, this makes sense to me, as opposed to, gosh, I'm going to have to go and try it out for an entire year, blood, sweat, and tears in the gym to make this happen. So that's one of the reasons why people want to believe that evidence. And I spent a decade of my life getting to the point where I had some clue about understanding science. The issue there, and I mentioned this before, that I will continue to mention it, is that the question asked by research studies it's a statistical one. It's a probabilistic one. So if I took bodybuilders between the ages of 18 and 35 with at least 1 year of resistance training experience, and I exposed them to this particular intervention, would I expect that it would work? And the question would be yes or no. And that's still based, it depends on what kind of statistics you use. There's various ways this can be done. But in the old school, we'd use inferential statistics, and we look at a probability value, and we would say yes or we would say no. But in the real world, it's not yes or no. It's not black or white. For some people, it worked. For some people, it didn't. This idea of biological interindividuality is a hard one to grasp because we like to compartmentalize as humans. And I get this all the time. Scott, quit beating around the bush. Should I do it or should I not? I'm told that all the time. And I can't say I can provide the evidence for you, but you have to make up your own mind. And there's effort. And that's the thing. And I'll leave it at this because this all fits together. Is one of the beauties of bodybuilding in my mind is that it requires effort. That's part of the point. The more effort you pour forth, the stronger you get mentally and physically, the better you look. And you see the fruits of your labor, pardon the pun, in your physique. And then you keep on trying, pushing, trying new things, learning, getting better, becoming more resilient, right? That's the end of the spectrum that I come from with bodybuilding. Maybe it's old school. But there's also the normal human inclination to want to look good, right? And I think if you went and asked the general populace, hey, if we could give you a magic pill and you would look like Brad Pitt from Fight Club or the guy who plays Thor in the Avengers or whoever, you didn't have to do any work for it, everyone would say yes. Of course they would, right? So we look for the easier path, and not knowing that science is very nuanced, right? And that the question that's asked is a statistical one, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the yes or the potential yes at the end of a study means it's going to work for you, isn't something that is easy for everyone to take on board. It's a very fuzzy world of ideas. And the alternative that you're going to have to put forth a lot of effort to figure out if this works for you or it doesn't, and maybe spend at least months trialing something, isn't something most people we want to do because we are creatures of immediate gratification. Giving me the answer now, tell me what I need to do so I don't have to waste any time. I'm not going to go get those oranges. They're right here in front of me. Give me the low-hanging fruit. And so it's a matter of human nature. So I'll leave you to translate.
No, posso tradurre perché avevo le cuffie.
Come vuoi, Andrea, se no traduco io uguale.
No, nessun problema. Il discorso di Scott è estremamente ragionevole su questo. La scienza e il ricorso così forte alla scienza è per una serie di motivi. La scienza viene da un punto di autorità, quindi automaticamente è come se si sobbarcasse la possibilità di dire noi siamo la verità, tutto il resto è errore, e come è ovvio, le persone tendono ad evitare gli errori se possono farlo, perché questo significa risparmiare tempo. La soluzione che offrono è pronta e finita, quindi non c'è necessità di sperimentazione. Tende ad essere a più basso livello di effort, quindi non c'è necessità di fatica. Tende a far risparmiare tempo, perché appunto arriva già pronta e collaudata. E il problema della scienza è che arriva da un punto di vista statistico, mentre quello di cui tu hai bisogno come atleta è una risposta individuale. Quindi tu puoi anche avere uno studio che funziona per il 50-70% delle persone, ma tu non sai mai davvero, se non provi, se non ci perdi tempo, a quale parte di queste appartieni. E ha fatto l'esempio appunto se uno ha un albero d'arance e vuole delle arance, non si allontana per andarla a comprare da qualche altra parte, ma prende quelle che ha sotto mano. E la scienza in questo senso è l'albero d'arancia, offre una soluzione pronta, comoda, prestampata, precompilata a un problema di allenamento e di alimentazione che altrimenti dovresti cercare di carpire solo con anni e anni di prove e anche di intelligente applicazione dei fondamentali, capire come funziona, mettere da parte e risolvere. Quindi questa necessità di dover fare tutto sotto l'egida della scienza è qualcosa che si vede dappertutto, anche dalle loro parti. E quindi direi che questa è la risposta. E posso aggiungere una cosa con Scott e poi la traduco. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. Regarding this idea of science, there is always something that really bothers me, which is actually at the core of the problem, even at the premise of the problem. Science, by its own nature, it doesn't speak about bodybuilding. It speaks about muscles, resistance training, performance, which are part of bodybuilding, but it's not bodybuilding in and of itself, because bodybuilding is an aesthetic endeavor in which performance, muscles, and aesthetic and numbers are proxy for what we are trying to achieve. And the reason why I say this, and I think it's important, is if you think about it, you basically never have a study where scientists take picture of what's happening of the athletes. And one of the greatest examples, in my opinion, is the so famously known the Beijing study, the 600 milligram of testosterone, which has become the Trojan horse for saying steroid users don't have to do shit. They just need to rely on the couch and everything go. Every time I have the chance to speak about this with somebody who cares enough to actually listen, they oftentimes change their idea when I say, I could give you 4 extra pounds of muscle and you would look worse, because science doesn't care where you put those muscles. If I give you 4 pounds of muscles and those muscles goes into your forearms, neck, glutes, obliques, and hamstrings and calf,
right,
you will look, you are 4 pounds heavier, more muscular, but you will look like Shrek. You will be worse off on a bodybuilding stage. So you will check the box of resistance training,
right?
You will check the box of increased performance. You will check the box of steroids do the work for you because I gained 4 pounds of muscle being on the couch, but you will fail the bodybuilding box. So in other words, it seems to me that way too often those words are used interchangeably when in reality they are two parallel roads that they seem to be close enough to be considered the same thing, but they are not. And the closest example I can give it to you is, it seems to me like science is studying Spanish in order to pass an Italian exams. If you know the languages, you will realize that they are so similar that oftentimes you may be on the idea, I'm doing the right thing. Because there are many words in common. There is a lot of grammars in common. But then when you actually put it on the practice, you are not able to speak Spanish in Italy and try.
Right.
And that's the reason why most of the time, in my opinion, in my very humble estimation, the science court is only able to achieve results that they do not translate on a bodybuilding stage. Because they are studying a proxy of what the bodybuilding is. A partial part. So does it reason with you? What's your opinion on this?
Yeah. So there's so many factors that go into what. In fact, it's funny. There's a paper that came out not too long ago, and the whole idea of the paper is the contention that bodybuilding is a sport. We go to the shows and we refer to the competitors as athletes, right? The athletic endeavor of bodybuilding happens in the gym, and aside from posing, which is more of an art form, there's no actual athletic competition that occurs on the bodybuilding stage, unless the guys are bumping elbows, right? There's no score. There's no objective measurement. You're not doing a powerlifting competition where you know how much you bench, squatted, and deadlifted. It's a subjective beauty contest in a certain way, really. With the posing component. So it's very much in that way a subjective endeavor that doesn't fulfill all the requirements of what you would call a sport. This is a thing that I hope will be done, and it could be done, just to show one example of where science could actually come close to measuring a bodybuilding outcome is doing peak week studies. So I've been in. There was a review article that came out in 2021 on peak week. Guillermo Escalante is the first author. I've actually got another article coming out sometime in the Strength and Conditioning Journal on training during peak week. And we have measurements of intracellular and extracellular water. We have measurements of skin thickness that have been done, looking at a peak week strategy. We have biological parameters that should relate to that visual effect that you have in being full and dry. What happened to your glycogen levels? What happened to intracellular water? What happened to skin thickness? What happened to total body water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Those things could be measured in a subjective fashion, and data can be collected. You could, for instance, take professional judges from the IFBB, let's say, or well-versed judges, and create a scoring system, or use a ranking system like you typically do in bodybuilding competition, and try to and maybe use I'm coming up with a study in my head right now as I speak. Maybe use several flights of judges and compare the same subjects before and after different peak week strategies, or before and after the same peak week strategy, in a way where you could, for instance, take the same athlete, have them judged by 5 different groups of judges on a 0 to 10 scale before a peak week where they've done no carbohydrate loading and no drying out, run them through a peak week strategy and have the same groups of judges judge that same physique. And they judge numerous physiques where they couldn't see the person, maybe even have a period of time, counterbalance it with before and after shots so they don't know which is before and after peak week. So blind them to the conditions and then see, does this peak week strategy actually improve on-stage performance, so to speak, in terms of how it's judged subjectively by those judges. So the reason I bring that up is there are ways that you could scientifically, quote unquote, assess the subjective evaluation that we see of bodybuilders on stage. But those are psychometric analyses, basically. Those are subjective analyses. And that's not not that exercise science is a particularly hard science, but that's an even softer science, because we're looking at subjective measurements that a judge would make. But those things could be tested. But you're right, they're all peripheral measurements that would contribute over time. If you take a bodybuilder, and let's say you could do this, and you make ultrasound muscle thickness measurements of the calves, the quads, the hamstrings, the lats, like all the major muscle groups, and do a body composition estimate, and they put on 25 kilograms of fat-free mass over the course of 5 years, and and you have roughly equivalent percent increases at all those places you measured muscle thickness. And you can also do 3-dimensional scans, and you can make a 3-dimensional estimate and you can look at some of the standard things like circumferences of the calf versus the neck. That's a classic example. So you could look at the relative proportions and even use an algorithm to determine what would stand up to be a symmetrical balance, top to bottom, waist size to chest size, etc. You could actually construct an objective assessment of what would be then, and then you then validate this with judges rating. You could construct an assessment tool for bodybuilding performance that's based on a subjective criterion, a validation criterion that comes from judges that are the best in the world, that have been judging for at least 10 years at the professional worldwide level, what have you. So
this was done, by the way, if you
What's
remember. This was done in the 60s by John McCallum in his book, Key for Muscle Grow, I think I remember, where he took the measurement of the best bodybuilder from the 30s, 40s, 50s.
yeah,
He collected a ratio of the body parts, and then he created a chart with from how tall you are, how much do you weigh. These are supposed to be the perfect match, the perfect measurement for your body parts,
right.
so that you reflect the icon that you consider, I think, was Steve Reeves.
Yep.
So the closest you get to those ratio, the closest you are to Steve Reeves.
Right.
It was a very primitive in some way, but absolutely coherent with your idea. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was sort of what I was basing my idea on. That's been done. Those ratios of neck being the same as calves comes from that, I believe.
Yeah. Unless you are pulled delay, the calf of the measure of your chest.
Right. Right. So, but those things could be done with the current standards, right? You could even do something retrospectively to some degree and look at those ratios across the decades since then, the McCallum stuff that you just mentioned. So science could do those things. We just, the issue is, and we're getting there, we're moving that direction, is you need to get money to do these studies to support the students who are doing them, right? And the question is like, so what good are we doing for society by figuring this out, right? We're not saving lives here. We're not curing cancer in doing this. But the scientific method could be applied, but you're totally correct. You're totally correct. And the thing that the biggest limitation in terms of one of the biggest ones, at least in terms of science actually being applied to bodybuilding as its end result on stage, or the physique you actually obtain, is that we don't have the long-term studies. The studies last 8, 10, 12 weeks, maybe 6 months. But you're doing over the course of a 5, 10, 15-year career where you're trying to eke out every last bit of potential that your physique may have available to it. You're doing things that aren't going to be measurable in any way that would be statistically significant year in, year out to get better. When you slowly creep up a few more pounds on the scale, or you refine your physique in a way that's that we aren't studying, that could be assessed with the method I just kind of concocted there. So that's where the science sort of falls short, is we've just got these very short-term measurement. It's kind of like, imagine you want to drive, I'm going to use some US geography, you're going to drive from LA to Boston, right? And you follow those people for the first 100 miles when they get across the California border, and you say, okay, this is the right way to get to Boston. You just project it all the way out. Well, you might end up in Florida if you go that one direction, because you only tracked it for 6 to 12 weeks or 6 months at most. So what happens in the long run is the thing that we haven't followed up, and it would be very, very expensive to measure those things, and time and cost intensive to measure those things. I'll leave you with this. There's a meta-analysis that came out in 2020. Benito, I believe, probably an Italian researcher, and they examined a number of factors, looking at what are the things that predict changes in, I think they broke it down into fat-free mass, also lean body mass, because that sometimes is calculated. Anyway, the interesting thing is one of the ways that they categorized the subjects in, these were, there was maybe 100 studies in this meta-analysis, was based on number of years of experience. Less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years, and 4 years plus. And you would expect, and we all know this, right? There is a law of diminishing returns. When you first start out, you make better gains. The second year is good. The third year is difficult. The fourth year is very, very difficult. Most people, they don't make much changes after the first, unless they go on year or what have you. The growth is very, very minimal after a few years. In this collection of studies, in this meta-analysis, there was no law of diminishing returns of apparent when you looked at the experience of the subjects that were studied. The subjects that were 4+ years gained just as well as the subjects that were less than a year. That suggests to me there's some selection bias that goes on. So imagine you're someone who's been training for 5 years, right? And you've been at it, and you've been refining how you want to train. You've tried a bunch of things, and now you think you know what works, right? And someone says, "Hey, we'll bring you to this study, and we'll give you a free creatine, a kilo of creatine when you're done, or something like that. You don't get paid much." Are you going to go into a study and let them take complete control of your training? Probably not. But if you're someone who has been at it for 3 or 4 years and is lost and doesn't know what you've been doing, hasn't been making good progress, hasn't had a consistent approach, and then they put you in a study where they make sure your nutrition is on point, they make sure your training is on point because you come into the lab to train, those are the people who are going to grow. So this meta-analysis shows that at least this is my interpretation, there's potentially a problem in the research literature because they're showing highly advanced, experienced people, not advancedness, but experienced people growing just as well as people who are newbies. What does that mean as far as experience level in these studies? It suggests that it doesn't do what we all know is happening in the real world, is that the longer you've trained, the less you grow. There's something fatally flawed in the selection process for the research studies when they pull in people that are experienced, because the ones that have made good gains and have maxed out their potential probably don't enter the research studies. It's the ones who don't know what they're doing that come in. So there's issues with the research, but that's a great question, man. That's a great question. We're so far away from being able to do science directly on bodybuilding, stage bodybuilding, but there's reasons for it, like I said. So I'll leave you to translate. That was
this is not going to be translate. So all I'm going to say in Italian is that Scott ha al 100% confermato quello che di solito i membri più illustri di questo gruppo, Alberto, Simone e questo Gabriele, parlano sempre, cioè che in teoria non c'è differenza fra teoria e pratica, in pratica c'è e come. Quindi la scienza ha un eccellente valore spesso post hoc, ma non può essere mai vista a prioristicamente come la soluzione al problema. Ci vuole sempre l'applicazione pratica. In pratica i dubbi di Simone vengono ulteriormente confermati da tutta quanta la risposta. Non voglio rubare ulteriore tempo perché abbiamo già portato 2 ore il podcast. Prego Alberto.
Scott, in social media, every day there's more and more bodybuilding experts. But when I go to NPC contest with my athletes, there's no audience. There's no one. Just girlfriend, boyfriend, parents.
Yeah.
I'm talking about amateur show, pro show goes better. Amateur show, really low audience. It's an Italian problem or a worldwide situation?
Worldwide, I don't know. In the U.S., it's pretty variable, I think. There, you go to some small shows with natural organizations that aren't as developed as the NPC. I mean, the NPC kind of almost has in the non-tested bodybuilding world, they have almost a monopoly, right? The NPC is everywhere. But it's highly variable. You go to bigger cities and you're going to get enough people that the show will be pretty well maxed out. You go to states like I've lived in Arizona, I've lived in Florida. In both places, people are pretty fit. You're going to have more bodybuilders per capita in those states, and in the big cities, you're going to get people there. So you go to a high school or a small auditorium, you're going to get a lot of people there. But it depends on the level of the show, so it's highly variable. But I think you're right. I mean, this is the thing. Like, I mean, gosh, so now I'm going to show my age again here, but back when I was first following bodybuilding, like you wouldn't know what happened at the Mr. Olympia for 2 months because it would only come out in the magazines afterwards. Right. So now you can watch everything live. If you want to watch a local show and sit on your couch, you can just go to Instagram and someone's probably filming it for you. The thing I thought about this question because I saw it in the email. And the thing I think that might help there, and I promoted a show here in Florida for a couple of years, and we weren't making money. I mean, that was kind of maybe eventually. There's so many shows, and that's interesting because in Florida there's just tons and tons of shows. There's over 100 shows, so literally there was a couple shows every weekend on average. Is that some people who are just hardcore bodybuilding fans are going to go no matter what. This is what they do. This is their life, right? But I think creating something around the bodybuilding shows would be one way to sort of get more people to go to the shows, where you have like a gathering the night before, at someone's gym. Let's say one of the promoters has a gym. In my case, my co-promoter Tony Torres has a gym in Miami, Iron Temple Gym. Actually, for anyone who's listening who goes to Miami, go to Iron Temple Gym with Tony Torres. They could have a party there and people go and get to meet one another, meet the athletes if they wanted to go, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Create something social. Long ago, there's a pro, he's a Masters competitor. I think he might still compete every once in a while. Maybe he's retired. He probably would never say it, but Vinny Galanti is his name, Italian.
Yeah, of course.
I met Vinny Galanti at the 2000 Mr. Atlanta. I competed at that show. He was the guest poser, and he was putting on a seminar after the prejudging before the night show. I'm like, hell yeah, this guy's been at it for a while. He's not quite a pro, but he's getting close, and he was doing really well. He'd been sponsored already. He was doing guest posing.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, Scott. I have to go with my sons.
Understood. Family first, my friend.
Ciao,
it's been a pleasure.
Ciao, Gabri.
Grazie.
Ciao, Gabri.
Ciao, Gabri, prestissimo.
And I was the only one who showed up. No one else showed up. So I basically had a one-on-one conversation. You guys there we go. Now we're good. I had a one-on-one conversation with Vinny that day. It was awesome. I don't know why no one else showed up. They weren't interested, but maybe they didn't.
Of opportunity.
I thought so too. Right. So that's the thing. I think this depends on the promoters, how money oriented they are, but I think you go to some shows too, and it's kind of like who's the biggest guy in the audience competition. Everyone wants to be the big shot. There's some things. I think there are things that could be done to create a social event outside of the bodybuilding show too, right? That would help with that. So, and bodybuilding it's still a subculture, right? To some degree. So, you're kind of pissing in the wind. I think now we're organized here, picture wise. But yeah, it's highly dependent upon the region, the show, the organization. But there are things that could be done to do that. The thing is, I don't know that the promoters necessarily care because no one has done it yet. You guys remember Craig Titus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So before Craig did all the things that he did, he was the very first person to start throwing after parties at some of the big shows, like the Olympia and the Arnold. And he would have these parties, and it became a huge thing, right? And I think he was making money. He was probably doing other things during those parties. But now people do that after the big shows. There'll be after parties, special invite after parties. But he started that phenomenon. But I don't know why no one else had thought of it at that time. So imagine if the promoter said, and they do this every once in a while, we're going to have pre-parties the night before at a gym. Everyone can work out for free. If the athletes will be there, you can meet them, what have you. And it started to create more of a social community. I think because you're there at the show, you're watching the show, right? You're going to mingle with people out in the lobby maybe, but having some social community that happens outside of the show itself would be a way to then get more people to go, I'm going to go to the free event, check it out. I'm like, no, I want to go to the show the next day because I met some cool people and I got a chance to talk to them. So that might be one way to do it. But yeah, you're right. It's an uphill battle, man, because stuff is so easy to see online. You don't have to go to the shows. It's right there on your phone or on your computer.
Let me see what can I do with this.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries. In realtà la domanda era relativamente al fatto che Alberto giustamente faceva notare ci sono un sacco di coach, un sacco di atleti, ma le gare, specialmente quelle di più basso livello, sono veramente vuote. Spesso solo i parenti e molto spesso neanche quelli. Se si poteva fare qualcosa a riguardo. Scott ha detto chiaramente che non ha un'idea precisissima a riguardo, perché altrimenti se esistesse l'avrebbe già venduta e avrebbe risolto il problema. Ad ogni modo la sua idea verte soprattutto sul creare qualcosa di interessante intorno alla competizione, e ha fatto l'esempio per esempio di quello che si poteva fare con un meet and greet, cioè vale a dire si organizza un incontro e una sorta di chiacchierata e fotografia tra gli atleti e il pubblico prima della gara. Un esempio che mi viene in mente, questa invece è una mia cosa personale, si potrebbe organizzare una esibizione, una manifestazione come per esempio quella che si faceva in Germania, la FIBO, che era qualcosa che le persone adoravano, in Europa era la più grande. Ha fatto l'esempio di come quello che sta succedendo adesso, il non considerare il valore dei campioni e delle persone di un certo calibro, non è così nuovo, perché spesso gli è capitato, ho fatto l'esempio di un autore, di un bodybuilder del passato, non così arcaico, ma comunque sia del passato, Vini Galanti, che aveva organizzato un seminario intorno a una gara e non si è presentato nessuno, e lui ha avuto l'occasione di poter quindi parlare con questo Vini Galanti da solo. E poi ha fatto un piccolo escurso storico relativamente al fatto che l'unico nella storia del bodybuilding che aveva pensato all'idea di creare un after party è stato Craig Titus, che purtroppo adesso è ancora in galera per aver ucciso lui e la moglie una persona che lavorava per loro, quindi non il massimo della referenza da questo punto di vista, ma che però perlomeno era stato quello che aveva pensato di creare una comunità di supporto, anche se soltanto dal punto di vista festaiolo, intorno alle esibizioni di bodybuilding, per incrementare l'interesse e la partecipazione. Prego Alberto.
Okay, we've done 2 hours, so let's 2 quick questions. I'm gonna be the first one, and Simone, in our tradition, gonna close the podcast. Only if you want, share with us a sweet memory of John Meadows.
My favorite John story, there's lots of them, but my favorite John story was...
Before you go, Scott, just a second. I just want to say this. I'm going to say it in Italian and then I'll translate in English. La domanda di Alberto, se mi posso permettere, su John Meadows, oltre ad essere naturalmente interessante perché sono amici, ha anche dal mio punto di vista una prospettiva particolarmente diversa da altre, perché tutti sappiamo quello che è il pubblico italiano, generalmente mal sopporta gli americani, una certa visione della farmacologia e così via. Credo, non so se Alberto sei d'accordo, che John Meadows è stato uno dei pochissimi che era riuscito veramente a mettere d'accordo tutti, appassionati di scienza e bros. Natural è una di quelle figure che letteralmente era amato e rispettato da tutti quanti. Quindi glielo vorrei tradurre. What I wanted to say, and I wanted to double check with Alberto, is John Meadows figures. This question is not just a cheap way to get some emotions out of it, because everybody knows John Meadows was a great friend of yours. But it was also, there's a reason. John Meadows was very, very likely the only person who was able, at least in the Italian stage, to become a point of interest for both the natural and the enhanced community, for the bro and the scientists, for the new generation and the old generation. For whatever reason, and you obviously being his friend, you can know this better than anybody else. He was able to make agree almost everybody on his figure, and that's why a question on John Meadows becomes particularly important regarding the Italian stage of bodybuilding. Please.
In reflecting on that, I was at John's house a couple times over the years, and one thing I think maybe the first time I was there, he went out and got his mail, and he would get packages from around the world full of all sorts of people would send him like treats and goodies. And I think he would get them from Italy. He'd get them from the Far East. People somehow would get his address, and maybe he gave him the address, but people that weren't even his clients would just send him gifts. And stuff that he didn't even know what it is. It's like, what's in this package?
Does it mean?
Yeah, I couldn't tell it. No bombs that I know of. It was all good stuff. So yeah, he really was loved. And it's funny because I agree with that. I can totally see why John crossed over so many communities in that way. That's part of when I collaborated with John, why he wanted to work with me is because, and he used to always say, is like he would try to surround himself by people smarter than him. I don't know that I'm actually in that group or not, but I was the guy with a little more science education than he was. And when he asked me to help write his book, The Brutality of Mountain Dog Training, so he could describe his training principles in a book. And he's like, Scott, and I want to add some scientific substantiation to what I've got here. And it was such an honor to be able to take the wisdom of his training strategies and then apply science and dig up science to substantiate the things that he learned in the trenches, right? To say, okay, yep, there's some science that supports why you've been doing this that he didn't even know about. Going back to one of the earlier points of this podcast, he learned through doing. He learned from the old boys that he grew up with, the guys, this is the way we did it. But then he would then learn, like, maybe there's another way to do it. So he had so many years of experience, but he was always open to new things and new ways of understanding. And we would have talks like that bird et al. Study. Remember when that study first came on my radar, we talked about it. And he thought that was just the coolest thing ever. That was a study that he would talk about in his seminars. So, yeah, that's really nice to hear that. I wasn't aware of that in the Italian community, but if it would have been anyone that could crack into all those areas of the Italian bodybuilding community, yeah, I can believe it would be John.
Well, for sure.
My favorite, John, it was one of my earliest memories with John was, I'm trying to remember it was the first year that I did the Masters Nationals, NPC Masters Nationals. This is when John was still trying to get his pro card too. He did, I never did. And there were like 28, 29 competitors in this age division and this weight class. Heavyweight, I think it was probably 40 to 45 maybe. So then this started happening less and less the more I competed. But then you did the morning prejudging, regardless of what call out you were in, everyone came back, right? Because everyone would go on stage at least one time, but only the top 5 or the top 6 would actually do a posing routine because they only had so much time. But everyone came back, right? And I didn't know where I was going to place, but we were all crowded into the backstage area, like probably the couple of people that weren't there, but all 28, 29 of us. And John had been there a few years already, and they started calling. So the next 5 names are the people who are in the top 5. You're going to do your posing routines. And they said a couple names, and they said John's name, and then they said my name. And I was like, John ran over to me, grabbed me and hugged me. He said, oh my God, he was happier than I was by far. He was ecstatic that I made the top 5, right? And I was happy too. But John was so overjoyed, and now you're going to elicit the motion from me. But one way to figure out if someone is really your friend, and I've seen this mentioned many times over the years, you could even test someone this way if you weren't really sure, is see how they react to your victories. When something good happens for you, Do they just brush it off and go to the next topic? Or do they want to relish? Is your joy equivalent to their joy? And in this case, John's happiness with my victory, making it the top 5 in a very competitive class, was actually overshadowed mine. He was happier than I was.
He was happier than you.
He was happier than me. And that told me what kind of a person he was in spades. So that's my favorite. That's one of my favorite bodybuilding memories. Because the placing was never that important for me. It was just, okay, that was cool. That was great. But John was just so happy because he knew that meant I had succeeded. To be in the top 5 was, a really good placing at a show that competitive. That was that competitive that year. So that's my favorite memory of John. That's the one when I think about who John Meadows was, no one was there unless I were here to tell about that. No one else is going to pass that along. There was no cameras running. He wasn't in front of a group of people. There was no stage. That was backstage. He didn't have to do that. And I didn't know John that well at that time. We'd only communicated and we talked at the show, but I hadn't had the interaction with John that I had then later in the years following. That was one of my first interactions. He was just happy because he knew me. He thought I was a good guy, and he saw a good person have success. And that for him was a good thing. And that made him happy to see good people have good things happen to good people. So that's my favorite John memory.
I will try to translate it with the dignity he deserves. So, di John, anzitutto va specificato, John e Scott erano migliori amici. Ha detto un paio di cose interessanti. Una, John riceveva regali letteralmente da tutto il mondo, anche da persone che non erano i suoi clienti, per ringraziarlo di quello che aveva fatto e quant'altro. John ha sempre detto di aver dato lo spazio a Scott, e Scott molto modestamente ha ricordato di aver avuto un piccolo contributo scientifico al libro di John, il libro era The Brutality of Mountain Dog Training. E la cosa più importante, il ricordo più importante è stato quando all'inizio della loro amicizia, quindi diversi anni fa, John e Scott hanno condiviso lo stesso palco. John è diventato professionista, Scott no, dal punto di vista professionale come bodybuilder. John è stato più di successo rispetto a Scott, però in questa occasione particolare avevano ottenuto entrambi la top 5, che per John era qualcosa di più consolidato, ma per Scott era la prima volta, e Scott è rimasto emozionato all'idea di vedere quanto John fosse contento per lui, a tal punto che si ricorda la situazione come se la felicità di John nel condividere questa top 5 fosse superiore alla sua stessa felicità. E questo è uno dei ricordi più belli, forse il ricordo più bello che ha di John all'inizio della loro conoscenza e amicizia. Prego ragazzi.
Okay, Simone is sleeping, but just because he's around 290 pounds now. But Monday we start.
Naps are anabolic. It's a good thing.
We started out. Last question is our traditional question.
La domanda è questa: un pregio e un difetto di Scott come persona e Scott come coach o atleta, come preferisce?
So this is a classic question for the podcast. So classic that has become a classic in and of itself in Italian's podcast. So people are starting to do something along these lines. That's how important it is. And the question is a good thing and a pitfall, so to speak, of Scott as a person and as a coach or athlete or in any other endeavor you want to see yourself.
Yeah, there's a double-edged sword to the way I operate with people. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, I really, really want to help people. And I have kind of a lifetime history of doing this. And sometimes I help too much. In all the things we've been talking about, like the idea of being a teacher and bringing people to the place where they would learn on their own, I often tend to help people too much. There are times where I help people and I can tell they just keep on coming back and keep on asking more and more questions. And I'm trying to get them to go, and I keep on answering. And I have a hard time telling people no. My dad was like this. My dad said yes to everything. I probably learned it as a kid. So the double-edged sword is that I just am a helper by nature. I just am a conscientious person by nature. I think it's probably in my genes. I learned it growing up. My role in my family meant that I became that kind of a person. But that means I sometimes I help people too much when I should be telling them, no, go figure it out on your own. I probably am overly accommodating sometimes. So there are worse things that someone could do, but yeah, sometimes I shoot myself in the foot as far as getting people to be independent, autonomous thinkers because I help too much.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Which defeats your teaching purpose.
It does. And I get taken advantage of too, as well. I've got a good history of that, being taken advantage of a few times. But there are worse things, I don't think too many people lie on their deathbed and say, I helped too many people. I shouldn't have been so helpful. I'm probably not going to regret it too much, but I realize I do overdo it.
And instead has, let's say, bodybuilding or coach, how would you categorize yourself? A good thing of what you have done for bodybuilding, and maybe what would be a bad thing that you have done for bodybuilding?
Bad thing I've done for bodybuilding. The good thing is I hope I've encouraged people to think for themselves. I tell you, I don't know if it's a bad thing per se, and I try to counter this as much as I can. Is sometimes people have the sense, and I this is the running joke, like I have to get out an encyclopedia to understand what Scott is saying. I tend to try to use, and I use technical terms where technical terms do the best job of describing what I'm talking about. I oftentimes like to paraphrase what I'm saying, but the thing that I sometimes miss with, especially because so much is online, is I can't see the people's faces with whom I'm talking. So if I'm in front of a classroom of students or I'm doing a seminar, and I can see, people are starting to fall asleep, right? Or they're not paying attention. You can get a sense of the crowd.
Yeah.
And can't always get a sense of my crowd. So I probably alienate some people because they're like, I can't understand what this guy's talking about. He's like, he needs to speak in English that I can understand. So that's probably the one thing I could always work on, but there's just an intrinsic limitation because that's the nature of being online. You're not going to see the faces of 1,000 people that might be listening. So that's the one negative I think that
Gotcha.
I can improve upon.
So let's say the impossibility to actually read the room in the in some way.
Yeah.
Ok, so la domanda, quella classica che Simone ha già ovviamente fatto, e dal punto di vista umano, Scott ha detto di avere come pregio e difetto quello di essere sempre molto disposto ad aiutare gli altri. Pregio perché è una persona facile di concordare d'accordo ed è una persona, quindi, sempre in virtù di questa sua visione da insegnante, che cerca di aiutare e di portare verso una sorta di indipendenza le persone con cui, quindi quello che è il bene delle persone che ha aiutato. Difetto perché tende ad essere troppo d'aiuto spesse volte e quindi in qualche maniera sabota questa sua pulsione da insegnante, perché le persone tendono a diventare troppo attaccate alle sue risposte, troppo attaccate alla sua persona, e appunto mancano questa possibilità di diventare indipendenti e di esplorare ed esplorarsi di più. Quindi lo stesso problema può essere visto come dice lui, una lama a doppio taglio. E per quanto riguarda dal punto di vista tecnico, dal punto di vista del bodybuilding, a cercare di spingere le persone a pensare per sé, che diciamo è anche un po' uno spararsi sui piedi dal punto di vista del coach, che ovviamente le due cose non collimano, però per lui quello di insegnare, educare le persone a essere indipendenti è più importante. Quello che si rimprovera è di non essere sempre in grado, anche in virtù del mezzo di comunicazione, di capire il pubblico che ha davanti certe volte, e quindi di aver alienato alcune persone utilizzando un linguaggio troppo tecnico o troppo complesso, e non essere stato quindi in grado di abbassare magari il livello della discussione per avere un maggiore engagement, per avere una maggior partecipazione da parte delle persone. Quindi questo è quello che nella peggiore delle ipotesi si rimprovera.
Scott, thank you so much for all the time, for
Absolutely.
the human being you are, and for the knowledge you share with us.
This was a blast, guys. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, Scott. I
Yes,
hope
thank you.
I gave your answer the right dignity and
Hey.
effectiveness.
Kudos on the translation, man. You had a lot to do, and I have absolutely no doubt you did it all justice. So thank you.
I enjoyed every second of it. So
Oh, cool.
I will do it. I will do it again, starting from now if I could. Thank you very
That's
much.
awesome.
Scott.
Thank you again. See you
Thank you,
soon.
guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Enjoy your night. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
Will, you too.
Ciao.
Enjoy.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao.
Buonasera.
Ciao.
Bye.